At She Can, we tell women's stories. We show how women got to where they are today, and we profile women from all walks of life and all over the world. And I'm delighted today to be talking to April Stearns. April, welcome to She Can. Thank you for taking the time of telling your story. You have a very interesting story. You're the writer, editor, and publisher of the Wildfire Magazine and also Wildfire Community. You were diagnosed with breast cancer at a very early age of 35, and you learned that it's a very healing experience in writing your own story down and documenting that journey, because it is a journey. And then you launched Wildfire Magazine to help other people who in theory are too young to be diagnosed with that disease. And you help them to tell their stories and heal by telling their stories. So tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that I always like to kind of start with is that I have been writing my way through the hard stuff of life since I can remember. Probably primarily since I was a teenager. I grew up in a house that I didn't have a lot of voice in. It wasn't safe for me to, speak and talk back and things like that. And so I found my way to writing as a way of keeping myself sane, making a path forward so I could envision, leaving that environment, but also so I could tell my side of the story in a way that felt safe. I learned really early on to have a good hiding place for my journal. But I think that it was really, really powerful for me to experience that as a young, very young person, so that when my breast cancer diagnosis came along, I already had that in my back pocket. I was diagnosed, like you said, at 35. I had a small daughter. I was breastfeeding. That's kind of how I found my lump, was through breastfeeding. And so I like to say that everything that happened for me after that moment of finding that lump, I saw through this lens of parenting and how I could get back to doing that work as quickly as possible. I was floored when my doctor told me it was going to be like 14 months of treatment. Being 35, I think the most severe illness I'd ever had was maybe mono, or, just a really bad cold or something like that. So when I was told it would be over a year of treatment, I didn't know what to make of that. Of course, now I've met women who are diagnosed metastatic, and that treatment goes on forever. And so I now understand that 14 months, I got off relatively easy in that regard. But even still, I was scared. I was really, really scared. And so I turned again to writing to keep myself grounded, to tell my side of the story, to have a place to get it out of my body so that I could show up for my daughter during the day. I could be present with my husband and feel like I wasn't just being consumed by those fears. So writing really, really, really helped me during that time for sure. And since.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit, April, since now that you've brought out many copies of this magazine, you built a real community for women to find open ears, to be able to tell their stories, to learn how to tell their stories, to find healing. What is your main motivator going forwards?
The reason that I started the magazine, and this was back in 2016 that I first launched the magazine, was because I didn't know anyone else who was diagnosed on the younger side. Certainly not in my own friend group, my colleagues, my family. There was no one else I could turn to and just say, you know, tell me what it's really like. Tell me how you're getting through menopause. Tell me how you're dealing with infertility or secondary infertility. Like, what about our savings? Like, how are we supposed to do this as young people? And I didn't have that community. Of course, now there are communities who have sprung up around the need for age specific resources. But at that time, I really couldn't find people who were going deeply into their story I was, on the other side of my treatment by that point and just really banging my head against that wall of trying to get back to normal. I felt like I'd been promised that I could get back to normal, and it was not happening. I was completely changed by my experience. And so I decided to launch the magazine as a way of selfishly healing myself. Like I needed to find those other stories and hear how people were making sense of this. And so I started the magazine in, like I said, March 2016. I've been publishing ever since, every other month. I think we just published like our 48th or something insane like that.
Beautiful.
But it's become, thank you. Yeah, it's just become a place of really, really digging into the stories. And I think for anyone who hasn't seen Wildfire or really seen what a breast cancer like this can look like, you would probably think that it is all about that diagnosis day or maybe about the challenges of treatment. But I think what sets Wildfire apart and what I'm passionate about is the living that happens in, around, and beyond that day of diagnosis. I believe strongly that none of us are blank slates. We arrive at that diagnosis having had lives and stories before that, and that plays a part in how we go through a cancer experience and that transformation that happens afterwards. So I'm all about using writing and storytelling to help people kind of bridge that gap between that diagnosis day and who am I now and how do I live now. And so in 2020-ish, when the pandemic was just getting going and everyone figured out that they had webcams and we could do this kind of thing, that's when I started doing virtual writing workshops and helping people to really start to use writing as a tool to process their experiences and also to find that empowerment of like, how do I fold this into my life now and carry it forward in a way that feels um, like I've been given back my life, given back my body.
Mm. Which is so inspiring, April. I'm so inspired by what you do and how much healing you bring about. April, so what do you think are the top qualities that you have or acquired along the way that really serve you in this? Obviously, you're a good writer and you must be a good coach because you really are able to pass that on to other people.
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. I don't think I've ever been asked that before, and I love it. I think I think listening is probably a really big part of what I do. I feel like everyone deserves a witness to whatever their particular story is, whether it's cancer related or, like I alluded to, a difficult childhood experience or any of the other myriad of traumas that come along in a life. I think that we deserve and require someone to hear us, someone to see us there and make us feel less alone and whole and like we matter. And so I think that's something that I've really honed over the years is really being able to listen to a variety of stories. And also on the other side of that, in terms of like writing those stories, I think I've really developed an ear for what makes a good story, a good breast cancer story in particular. And like I said, it's often, I mean, almost never is it the diagnosis story or that treatment story. There's something in there. Someone will just drop into the conversation like, oh, by the way, my brother also had breast cancer. And it's like, wait, what? Like, I need to hear more about this. Or, a trip that someone took with their mom to Italy that changed everything for them. Like, I'm always looking for those moments of uniqueness within each story that we can kind of bring out. And so I think that's one of my superpowers that I really enjoy is listening to stories and kind of teasing out those details that people don't know are the gems within their own stories because they're so close to it.
Yeah. April, so tell us a little bit, give us some tips on how people can get started with this process. And that could be anything. That doesn't have to be a breast cancer diagnosis, right? It's learning to write your story, which is a healing thing for everyone to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I would say, first of all, and I mentioned this earlier, is, find a good hiding place for your journal because I think like one of the big fears that holds people back from writing is they're censoring themselves because they're afraid of someone in their life reading their writing and either being hurt by it or being concerned by it, something like that. And so then they censor themselves when they get into writing. And that's not how writing heals you when you're being so careful with it. So number one, like get a good hiding spot for that journal. Number two is your journal actually doesn't even have to continue to exist. I always tell people it's the actual writing that is the healing part. So you could destroy that writing right after, burn it. I love burning writing. I think it's really cathartic. But you could also be writing in the sand on the beach or in the steam of your shower. It doesn't actually matter that it exists after you write it. It's that process, that brain to hand process of writing it that is so healing. There's tons of science around this. If anyone's interested in it, I really recommend a book called The Power of Writing It Down, where you can hear all about that.
Mm.
But the long and short of it is find a way to get yourself to start writing and make it safe for you. So you might experiment with writing in a way that feels private and really, really private. The second thing I would say, or maybe this is the third tip already, is just to really let it rip on the page. And the best way to do that is to set a timer. So I love having a timed writing prompt. Something like the story I need to tell is a really good prompt. And you set your timer for like 15 minutes and you promise yourself you're going to write the entire time the timer's going. And the reason for that is because a lot of stuff comes out on the other side of what you think you wanted to say or what you think the right answer is to a prompt. There's actually no right answer to a prompt, but we all try to be the best at everything we do and we want to be good at writing prompts. So if you set your timer and then lean into it, you'll be surprised at what comes out. And that can be a really great way to start. And you could even write on that same prompt every single day, just 15 minutes, just give it a shot. The story I need to tell or what I haven't yet said are both really good prompts. But it's that leaning in, not censoring yourself, and just seeing what needs to come up and come out, and then possibly burning it afterward.
Yeah. Amazing. I love these tips. They're really golden. April, so what are you most proud of to date? What do you feel is your biggest achievement to date?
Oh my gosh. I would have to say probably the writing workshops. They were a really big turning point for me in Wildfire because before that I was, putting out calls for submission and receiving stories, but we were lacking in that real community sense of seeing each other. And so to do the writing workshops where I just have small groups of women come together. Sometimes they've never been in a group of other people who are diagnosed on the younger side. And they've never had that cathartic feeling of hearing someone say in their own words, in their own voice, what their biggest challenges are, their biggest accomplishments are. And it really makes me feel good that I can hold space like that for people within the community. I like to say it's the support group for people who hate support groups because it's so much better than a support group. And I think it's because we get into that living. It's so much more than a breast cancer story. Sometimes the writing we do isn't even about cancer, it's just about the living
Hmm.
and exploring our stories.
Yeah, the messy bits.
Yes,
Well,
exactly.
so what are your plans and goals? How will you continue over the next years?
Yeah, well, I'm really excited to start doing more in-person writing workshops and retreats. So that's kind of the big thing that's on my mind right now is getting together in this, post-pandemic world where people seem to be really longing for more in-person programming and things like that. So I'm looking forward to hosting some things like that. I've kind of dipped my toe in a few things and they've gone great. And I would love to be able to support people in that way, in a really nurturing way. Um, and then, yeah, just continuing to find ways to help people with that writing process. Have some ideas for more like do it yourself kind of courses or journals and things like that for people who don't want to do the group thing. And that's okay. Sometimes that's not for everyone. I want to be able to help people just experience that power of writing wherever you are and however I can serve them.
April, I'm so grateful to you for the work you're doing, for holding the space for people who really need it, and also for making them tell their story, which I think makes all the difference. And it's really why we're doing She Can. So I'm so grateful for your story.
Thank you. Thanks so much.